Hi, this is Prof. Redder. This is a video to show you something about polymorphism. Polymorphism, the word itself, means many shapes. And the idea is that we would like to be able to have a single object that can behave like a bunch of different kinds of objects. And that may or may not make sense. It's kind of hard to grasp in a strongly typed environment at the outset. But this turns out to be done in a strongly typed way, so you can tell what kinds of things you're dealing with. So what I want to do is to show you this app that's going to demonstrate that. And I've written it so that I can show it to you in two different versions. And one version does it without polymorphism, because polymorphism is just flat out not necessary. But the other one does it with polymorphism, and it opens up the door to do a lot of other things much more efficiently than we can do without it. That's the point. So what I've got here is the idea that I've got some shapes. I've got rectangles and ellipses, and those are the only two that are implemented now. I put this here so you could see that you could extend it with others pretty easily. So what I'm going to do is specify the width of a shape and the height of a shape, and this represents a bounding rectangle that the shape will be in. And for example, with rectangles, the bounding rectangle is in fact the shape. And so I'm going to click rectangle here, and then I'm going to come over here in what's called a panel, which you can't see, and I ought to make it visible, and click on it. And when I click, I get a rectangle right there. Notice that the rectangle appears with its upper left-hand corner at the point that I was pointing to, and its width is 20 and its height is 30. And I could change that to say the width is 50 and the height is 30, and I get a rectangle like that. If I choose to click on ellipse, instead of drawing the rectangle, it uses that bounding rectangle to decide what the ellipse's shape will be. And there we've got that. So if I went back to this and said 20 and come over here and click, it changes those shapes. So this is kind of an introduction to trying to use the graphics capabilities of Java in the GUI world, and also just an indication of how we can create different objects. Now with this, I did create shape objects, and it turned out to be that I just let them go away. I just dismissed them, but I could have actually stored those shape objects somewhere as I'm putting them in there. But what we're going to do is first look at how it's done without the polymorphism, then I'll show you what the polymorphism does for us. So if you look down in this code, and this code will be on GitHub when this video is ready, I'm going to click on without polymorphism here, and you'll see that what I've got is a rectangle object, and if rectangle is selected, then I'm going to draw the rectangle using the parameters that come from the point I clicked at, and I'll show you where that's at in just a second, and the size and width of the rectangle. And so this is or not of the rectangle, but as specified on the screen in those two little boxes, 20 and 30, 50 and 30. So what we do here is we say, well, let's let the rectangle become the size and width as specified by just looking at this thing. I've got a size object here, and I have to use that, by the way, you have to include or import that thing right there. And if it's not there, when you come down here, it's going to complain about size, and as usual, you can select or click on that thing, press Alt Enter, and it's going to say, well, you need an import for that. And so that's the one I'm going to use. There are other sizes, but this is the one I'm going to use. Now it's okay, and it understands what that means. So the next thing that I do is populate that size object with a width and a height that I extract from the text for the text fields for width and height. I get that text, parse it into an int, store it in there. Same for the height. And then I've got this thing called a graphics object. If you look over here on the design and look at this thing, you'll see that it's a J panel. And J panels, I've given it a name for code. It's m_panel canvas. But a J panel has a bunch of properties. For example, I could change the border so we could actually see it to any one of these things. I think I'll give it an etched border. Click on OK. And now when I run this app, you'll be able to see where the panel is. So when I click inside it, I get things in there, and if I click way over here, for example, the thing gets cut off at the edge of that panel. So anyway, that panel is the thing I'm drawing on, and the way to do that is to use this notation that we have here, saying I want to get a graphics object for that panel, which I've called panel canvas. This graphics object is the thing that has all of the methods associated with drawing on an object. You can draw on a button with this. You could draw on anything that supports the get graphics method or constructor. Well, it's actually a method. Okay, so what I've done is I've created this rectangle object that is the width specified in that text field, the height specified in this text field, and then I check to see if the rectangle is selected. In other words, if the radio button for the rectangle is selected. And if it is, I'm going to use this graphics object to draw a rectangle whose upper left corner is at these coordinates. And actually I should use, yeah, that's fine. Upper left corner is at the point that we're pointing to, which, by the way, comes from this argument in the mouse clicked event handler. Mouse clicked event handler, if you look at it, we've got a whole bunch of values that we can use that have to do with that mouse click event. For example, even when we can decide when the mouse was clicked, and we can do all kinds of stuff. So I'd highly recommend that you go and play with all of those things. You can do some fun things with it just as a matter of enjoyment, I guess. But in any case, for us, I'm using the get point call, which gives me a point object. Also, by the way, which is described up here in Java auth. So you'll need to include that. All those imports are going to be necessary. But do them like I suggested with the alt enter when it has a little squiggly under it. You know that there's something wrong, and use that help. But it says here, if m_rb is selected, then I'm going to draw a rectangle. If not, if m_rb is an ellipse, I'm going to draw an oval. And if m_rb other is selected, I'm just simply going to draw a string that's a question mark. So you can see this going now. So when I run, I'll click on rectangle, I get a rectangle. Click on ellipse, I get an ellipse. Click on other, I get a question mark. And so, I mean, you can make games out of this. This would be a fun way to make a simple game. And you can use all of the power behind you with Java and all of the classes that you've got to cause those things to happen. You can even move these things across the screen if you mess around with them for a while. All right, so there's what we've got. And there's really nothing wrong with that, except that this is a really good opportunity to think about objects. The only objects we're using here are things like the graphics object and the GUI OOP shapes object, which is or class, which builds the app inside of it. That class, an example or an instance of that class, is this application. But you'll notice that I don't really have a rectangle object here. I do here because rectangle is defined as a class in Java, but I don't have the kind of rectangle that I'm drawing. And in fact, I don't think this rectangle has a draw method. So what I'd like to do is try to decide what I mean by a shape. So anytime somebody asks you that question in the context of writing code, what is a blank, where the blank is a noun, the first thing you should think about is building a class. So what's a shape? This is what I think a shape is. I think it's something that has width and height, has a constructor so you can build one, and it knows how to draw itself. And it draws itself on a graphics object, and you can see where that's going to go. And it's going to do it at this position, X, Y, at some specific location. So if we go back and look at this code, that's really pretty much what's happening anyway. The height and the width were determined based on what was in these two text fields and stored, or actually used in this draw method. The position is determined based on where the mouse click event occurred. Okay? So there's that and that, the mouse click event position, the height and the width of the rectangle that contains that contains the thing we want to draw, and a graphics object. But really what we would like to do, or what we're really doing here, is once we get the fact that we've got a rectangle selected, or that we've selected rectangle, if we could build a rectangle object and simply say, draw this rectangle object on this graphics object at this position, we'd have it made. I mean, it would be the same kind of thing, but there are advantages to doing it this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this out. You can do that up here by clicking on toggle comment after you've selected those things. I'm going to break this down. Notice this editor fold. You might want to go read about that. It's convenient too because it lets you do this kind of thing. Here's with polymorphism, and I'm going to take all of this and I'm going to uncomment that. I'm going to toggle the comment on that. This time I'm going to do something which I think is, oops, I can't do that. I got that guy, has to be a comment there. But what I've got is what I think is really very cool. What I'm going to do is this. Up above here in the code, you'll see that I created a shape object. It's called shape. And it comes right from this class right here that knows how the shape actually doesn't know how to draw itself, but it knows how to create it, how to create itself, and it knows what parameters are important. So I just created a shape reference, and I haven't created the shape object yet, but I'm going to. And here's how I'm going to do it. If the ellipse button is selected, the ellipse radio button. I've got an error in my code here somewhere. Oh, that's something else. I want to get rid of that. If I run this thing and look at this, if that's selected, or actually the first one is the ellipse, then it says, let me get rid of that, it says to create a new circle. All right, so a circle object, I really probably should have named it ellipse, but because it's not really a circle when it draws it. But I'm going to create a new circle object and put it in this shape object, in this shape reference, or point to it from this shape reference. So what's going on here? Well, here's what shape looks like, and here's what circle looks like. And this says circle extends shape. That means that the circle class is everything that the shape class is, plus some more. And the more is this. Circle has its own constructor. And this constructor can take arguments. And the arguments that it's going to take, if you want to accept them, for this case, are going to be the ones that really need to be sent to the shape class. So in this case, I'm going to just get them from the circle constructor and set them in the shape class, the parent of this, simply by calling super. Super is whoever the parent is of this. And you can have them nested. So what this amounts to is I create a circle object, and it's got a width and a height with in the shape part of the circle object that has those values in it. So this is pretty much like calling, well, this actually calls the shape constructor. Okay, so if you think about it, let me draw you a little picture here. I'll just use Word to do it. If you think about it, this, by the way, is a pretty stupid way to do things. We can think of this as being a shape. And actually, the shape contains the width and height in it. Also contains, if you look at it, the specification that there's a draw method, but the draw method here doesn't do anything. In addition to this, now we can have another piece, which is the additional part of the shape that that is the stuff about the shape that's a circle. All right, so all the shapes are going to have this part. So let me put the word shape in there. I think I can do that here. No, I probably can't. Oh yeah, let me undo that. I'm going to insert this guy. So this is going to be shape. And circle is going to be another one of these guys that is shape plus, well, let me do this. And that's circle. And let me move that down a little bit. And if I make this thing with no fill, then you can see that circle contains the stuff that shape does. But I could end up creating yet another one of those and call it rectangle. And I can create another one of those and it could be a star or a flag or something like that. So that each one of these guys, of the three guys there, I'm going to have a hard time getting to that one, has all of shape in it. So it's a really lousy picture, but each one of them looks like that. So what I want to think about then is that we have that going on here. We have a circle class right here. It says it extends shape. We have a constructor for it that simply calls this. We could also create variables that are a part of circle. For example, radius we could have in there and have it assigned a value, much like we assigned these values here. We could have that assigned a value in the circle class and have the stuff that goes on in the shape class go on up there. The other part is that this actually has a draw class, a draw method. Notice that within the shape we have created both a width and a height and stored them in the shape right there. And we also have the X and Y positions, the position where the mouse was clicked, and the graphics object we want to draw on at that position. And so we can now make that same call, draw oval, with X, Y, width, and height, because we know we're inside the circle, which is inside the shape class. So the width and height are coming out of the circle class, which actually is getting them from the parent shape class, and the X and Y are coming as arguments. So when we look at this code now, if you look at it carefully, you'll see that what I'm doing to start with is I'm checking to see if this ellipse is selected. If it's not, I check to see if rectangle is selected. And in both cases, I just simply create the object that I mean to create by that, a new circle object for a shape, a new rectangle object for the shape. And when I get down here, if shape is anything but null, then I'm going to call the shape method. And the shape methods draw. And this, notice, doesn't have anything to say about width and height, and that's because that's all stored in this guy. So what's the advantage of doing this? Well, let's run it and see that it actually works. This one works a little bit differently, because when I click here I get rectangles, and I click here and I get ovals. But when I click with other here, I don't get anything. Oh, I get ovals. So I don't know why that is right off the bat. Because shape is not null, is that right? No, I don't know why that is. Well, shape is not null because it's still, yeah, I don't know. I'll have to look at that. You can figure that out too. I'll see if I can figure it out. But in any case, we've got shape and circle. Oops, shape and circle. And rectangle. And I can add new stuff quickly. I can add new things very quickly, where I could simply say add a new class. We'll call it line. And I'm just going to come over here. I'm going to grab all of this and copy it, and I'm going to come to line, and I'm going to grab all of that and paste it. And in here I'm going to just say line, and that's public class line, width and height, and this is going to be oval. This is going to be draw line. What this means is to draw a line from XY, from that point, the upper left hand corner, if it was a rectangle, for example, that wide and that high. In other words, draw a diagonal from the upper left to lower right of that rectangle. That's what this draw line means. So if I were to come over here in the runtime environment or into the main app, and I just write something like this: if m_rb other is selected, we'll just use that one to create a shape. And it'll call its own draw. I mean, here we've got that it's just going to draw that line. So let's run this. I'll click other. There, I get a line. It's that quick and that easy to add something new. So the idea about this polymorphism thing is that we can use the polymorphism part by noticing that this guy right here, this shape object, or this shape reference as we call it, can be any number of things. And this is where the polymorphism occurs, right here on the shape. Because the question is, well, what draw function does that call? And the answer is, up here in the without polymorphism part, that wasn't an issue, because we're going to draw the rectangle for rectangle being selected. We're going to draw an oval for ellipse being selected, and so forth. But here, we only call draw one time, and we've got these draw methods, all of them doing special things. So how does it know which one to call? Because it knows what kind of thing that shape object contains, and it knows that by looking at that. When it creates that shape object, and you look at that lousy picture I drew in Word, then it knows it can look at that and decide internally, look at that and decide this is what kind of a thing that is. Let me point out just a couple other things. I decided to create these classes in a different place instead of in the classes folder, in the subfolder of classes called shapes, and as a result it comes up like this in here. That's how you do the import, classes.shapes, and it'll still help you with the alt-enter help business, but I chose to do it this way so I could just say star and just grab all of them. So this imports all of those classes that are in the shapes class, and you can use that to your advantage in organizing your code. Okay, so I'll have you an assignment for doing some polymorphism, doing something very much like this, and hopefully you'll enjoy that. This will be the last assignment for the class. So I hope things have been good for you. I'll talk to you at another time. Bye.